Hi. Hello. We're going to be taking a look at the anime I watched last season, that being fall 2019. There's not a whole lot. We're going to just talk about one, two, three, four shows, and one of them is very short. We're going to start with that. Oh, first we're going to start with things I didn't watch. The Oreski, I kind of came close to watching all of this. I'm part of a club that meets up every week to play rhythm games, like DDR, Pop and Music, 2DX, stuff like that. And then we also watch anime. So we had a lot of debate and discussion over what show we were going to watch this season. And we tried out this one. We watched like the first 3 episodes, I think. And it's pretty entertaining. It's pretty insane. Lots and lots of crazy twists and subversions and some pretty hilarious scenes too, but not something we could really all agree on. So I kind of planned on watching it myself afterwards, but I was quite busy and things kind of slipped away from me. And then I ended up asking my friend, who I knew had watched the whole thing, like, does it stay good? Like, is it worth it? And he's like, no, it gets pretty stupid. So I don't think I'm going to bother after all. I don't know. Maybe you have a different opinion. I was kind of put off of it. Oh, Rifle is Beautiful. So this one was another one that we tried watching at Club that I was quite excited for because it's Studio 3 Hertz, who have done fantastic shows like Flip Flappers and Princess Principal. Recently they put out the kind of movie length thing, Black Fox, which I was quite impressed by. So I had really, really high hopes. I was very curious to see what their slice of life would be like, but I found this show immensely disappointing. Just really cheap and lazy production, just a whole kind of flat, lame feeling. We only watched the first episode. Nobody was very impressed. I kind of wanted to watch all of it. If you remember in the last reviews video, we talked at some length about the actual rating process and kind of ways to get around this meaningless top heaviness. So one of the things I thought would be cool is just actually watching some shows that I thought were bad, like shows that I think perhaps right from the start, oh, this is pretty disappointing, and yet sticking with it so that I can give kind of a more critical analysis so we can talk about what doesn't work. And I thought this would be a perfect example to contrast with slice of life shows that I really like. Here's one that I wasn't very impressed by. But that really, who has time? Who has time to watch a show that they already dislike? I wish that I did, but it just didn't happen. Africa No Salaryman, I started watching. I think I saw maybe the first 4 episodes, and I was quite enjoying it. It's really silly, a very bizarre sense of humor that lines up more with like Eric Andre, I would say, kind of a sitcom Eric Andre mixture, rather than the sort of things I'm used to seeing in anime. There is some really impressive kind of mixed media type stuff. Most of the show is quite cheaply CGI animated, but then they would go really, really crazy for certain scenes with these big psychedelic breaks from reality that use actual animation and stuff. So I was quite enjoying it. I could see myself coming back to this when I'm in the mood for it, but I certainly just wasn't in the mood to watch something so depraved and insane. Like, if you're not going to laugh at this show, if you're not going to actually kind of get caught up in the frenzied comedy of it, then there's really no point. Like, it's just going to give you a headache. So maybe at some point we'll come back to this, but whatever. Okay, stuff I did watch. Mini Yuri. This is a 4-episode, 4-minute show promoting the Yuri Yuri OVA, which I haven't actually watched yet. I don't know why. It's been out for quite a while. I should do that. I'm quite looking forward to it. Probably cost about $12 total. Yuri Yuri, I always thought had pretty wonderful animation, especially when it was being done by Doga Kobo, but even the TKO animation seasons were cute and expressive and lively and fluid. This is much less so, just little chibi characters barely moving. But it's still super cute. Like, the character designs are super cute. The facial expressions they come up with are super cute. The situations that the characters are in and all of the kind of distortions and stuff that leads to, all very cute. So who cares? The premises are like really straightforward, really goofy, just straight up this episode we're going to be doing X, and then just kind of this little exploration of that. So stuff like opposites. What if all the characters were inverted? Viral videos. Let's parody a whole bunch of like internet, YouTube memes, or Nico Nico Doga memes, I suppose. The Olympics. How timely. Let's do a bunch of Olympic stuff. Oh, it's a murder mystery. This is it. This is the entire show. If you like the idea of the Yuri Yuri characters going through that kind of thing, you'll probably like this. It's nicely set up that all of these premises, they're just super joke dense. Scene after scene, there's just little bits of riffing, bits of humor. Nothing really substantial, but it kind of keeps you on your toes. Very funny. You're always kind of anticipating where they're going to go next. They really lean into a lot of the character tropes to the extent the characters have become kind of parodies of how they are in the main Yuri Yuri series. But that's quite a lot of fun too. It kind of takes place in this exaggerated version of the Yuri Yuri world, which as a fan of the series is kind of fun and refreshing to see. And even though there isn't too much emotional depth to anything in the show, your love for these characters, your love that was established through the original show and perhaps through like doujinshi or other fan works and stuff, still really shines through. You still feel like you're recognizing them and that you're appreciating them along the same lines that you used to. So it's kind of a I don't know, it's like taking advantage of something. It feels like you're almost getting tricked, that they don't have to put any of the emotional depth in this show because you've already got it. But it's a well done thing. If you remember a few seasons ago, I talked about a Strike Witches little parody type show that was a lot like this. And again, it was like because I was already a fan of these characters, because I had already seen the original Strike Witches series, it functioned in a way that was totally outside of what the show itself contained. And there's lots of little in-jokes and references for the super fans among us that have seen Yuri Yuri a lot. Just tiny little callbacks and visual gags and such. It's really fun. It does get pretty crazy at times. I think my favorite joke is when they cut to the actual VAs of the characters and they've gone like 3D. That really shocked me. That surprised me that they would go so far as to show the voice actors dressed up in cosplay of the characters. Things like that. It's like, oh wow, they're really gonna do it. Pretty fun. So how do you rate something like this? We talked about this briefly with the Strike Witches spinoff too. Like, is this really a good show? Or is it just a very enjoyable experience if you already have like a lot of this stuff going in? And I think I gave the Strike Witches show like a 7 or something. But this, I'm actually going to rate substantially higher. Just because I really, really love Yuri Yuri, even more than I like Strike Witches. And I think this did a pretty great job for its budget, for its length, for its many other restrictions in providing me the same joy that Yuri Yuri, the original, did as well. So this gets a 9. Yeah. I just had a great time watching it. I don't know what to say. Like, it'll get a 9, but it's like I couldn't actually compare it to shows. You know what I'm saying? Like, it gets a 9 for what it is. And I think that's a fair way to evaluate it. Because it's all about the commitment you make in watching it. If this was somehow 40 hours long, if this took 40 hours to watch, then no. But it's a little confusing because, like, in order for this to get a 9, you really do have to have had watched the previous seasons of Yuri Yuri, right? Otherwise, there's no way this show could possibly be a 9 for you. You have to have watched them and kind of invested yourself in them. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Whatever, it gets a 9. Moving on. Beastars. I watched this mostly on the strength of the manga getting really good reviews. It has like a 9 point something on MangaDex, which is quite impressive, and it's won various awards and stuff. And Orange, the studio who did this, a couple of years ago did Hoseki no Kuni, which was in a very similar spot, a very, very critically acclaimed manga with a substantial and devoted fan base. And then they make the bold and somewhat controversial choice to adapt it not as traditional animation, but CGI animation. Which I think only Orange is pulling off to this extent. Like, no offense to Africa, no Salaryman, but Yeah, I was so impressed with Hoseki no Kuni. I'm generally quite like trusting of high scores on Mangadex, so it's like, all right, I'll try this. But it was something that needed to be overcome because the aesthetic does nothing for me personally. I have nothing against furries. I have nothing against anthropomorphized animals or sexualized anthropomorphized animals even. But it's not in my wheelhouse specifically. So if it seemed like the show was going to be mostly just trying to appeal to people that were into that, then I wouldn't be too into it. But as I said, there was just such a reputation that I was like, okay, I should give it a chance regardless. I couldn't convince any of my friends though. Even after I started watching it, and I was like, "Oh, this is quite good." I kept trying to convince them, "Hey, let's watch Beastars. We can watch Beastars at club. We can talk about Beastars. I want to talk about Beastars." And everyone was just like, completely no interest whatsoever. Even talking about Hoseki no Kuni, even showing them the manga dex page, couldn't do it. People, the furry phobes, get over yourselves. Have some security in your tastes. You can watch something like this. If it's good, you should watch it. Anyways, it is good. It is really good. Story is super interesting. I think the other thing that really convinced me to pick it up, just because I kind of planned on watching it, but as circumstances come up, you realize that all the shows you plan to watch, you probably won't actually get a chance to watch. So I saw a tweet though from my friend Gene that Beastars was basically Zootopia plus The Wire. And after I saw that, I knew that I had to give it a chance, and I kind of plunged in. So what does that mean? Well, we've got complex but very well motivated entanglements between characters that are actually fully realized, that feel like they have substantial three-dimensional personalities, wants, needs, fears, desires, um, that are all somewhat in conflict. That all of these conflicts emerge quite naturally just from the inherent personalities and the social dynamics of the world. This is what really amazes me about The Wire is that they can have such personable characters and such amazing, complex drama, and yet none of it feels forced. None of it feels like it's happening just for the sake of the story, but that everything emerges just from the strength of the character writing. The plot lines themselves, kind of hit or miss for me. Like some of the developments, I kind of groaned at. Some of the other things, I would just kind of prefer them going in a different direction, different sort of genre mode. But I was always intrigued. I always wanted to know what would happen. I always wanted to see how the characters would respond and kind of get through these messes. Um, so I never felt disconnected from the plot, even when I was like, it was still like, okay, but prove me wrong, like make me invested in this. Um, and the lore, oh my gosh, the lore is incredibly deep in this series and often quite disturbing. So we have all of these anthropomorphized animal type stories. Zootopia is another good example. The Madagascar movies, I can remember dealing with this. uh, Redwall. I don't know, tons and tons of examples where it's like they want the characters to be largely human, but then to still have aspects of the animals themselves. BoJack Horseman, another example, or Tuca and Birdie. I don't know, tons and tons of examples. And to varying extents, they'll kind of honor the difficulties that would naturally emerge from this, right? Like they'll either kind of make some kind of almost lampshaded nod to it. Haha, in real life, this animal would eat this animal, but in this show, they're the best of friends, and then kind of move past it. Or they'll actually make it a substantial plot point, like something in Zootopia, where you're getting into how would this actually affect society to have these predator prey dynamics, like what kind of analogs to real life societal problems would occur from this. And Beastars is the furthest extreme I can think of at really tackling these questions. And not just kind of coming up with ways that it's like, oh, it's actually all okay, but making it seem like a deeply flawed and sort of tragic society full of danger and injustice, and letting that like seep into the plot lines. Like letting the show actually revolve around these types of struggles and stuff. I was mind blown. I had no idea that a show would ever take on this sort of plot theme so substantially. And you find yourself asking, like, how can all of this work? Like, how hasn't this society just completely frayed apart at the seams, with all of this conflict baked into it? But then you realize, like, you can ask that about IRL society too. If you actually look at all of the severe injustices of real life, all of the collective trauma that our cultures carry with us, all of the abhorrent acts throughout history that are still kind of encoded into our belief systems and into the way that we treat each other. It's like, not that I think Beastars is like directly analogous. In fact, one of the things I like about it is how much it resists being just a straight analogy for any aspect of actual society. Um, but it is kind of an eye-opening perspective to realize that our society is actually even more complex, seems even more doomed in some ways, and that we as well are just kind of barely keeping it together. Whew. So I think the use of animals feels really wholly justified in bringing out these unique societal dynamics. Like, sure, I probably would have been able to convince my friends if this was like Hugh stars, human stars, and it was just normal people. Um, but because they're able to have this additional dynamic, not just of like male, female, social classes, extrovert, introvert, but also predator, prey, large animal, small animal, all of these kind of instinctual things that each animal has. It feels well earned. It feels like you'd be really missing out on a lot of the plot depth if you didn't have this additional animal aspect, even if it seems kind of strange or silly or fetishy at first glance. So I don't know. Give it a try. Like, the direction and stuff, as I predicted, is pretty fantastic. Orange really is genius at using the advantages of CGI, like realizing the things that it can do that animation can't do so easily in terms of like camera movement, in terms of just dynamic character movement, in terms of kind of like a depth of scene where you're not really worried about the background being out of focus or characters going off model or whatever because you just have CGI models. Like a lot of things are just guaranteed perfect. And normally this is used as a crutch, but as I said, Orange works super hard to actually just use this to their advantage, to do things that no other studio is doing. So that all really impressed me. It felt very cinematographic. It felt like watching a movie in the best way. And the stuff that really blew my mind, though, was like the mixed media things. Kind of like Africa No Salaryman, that when they would for emphasis, actually cut to animation or cut to things like puppetry and stop motion. I think that's just really kind of mind-blowingly cool, and I think it shows that Orange is just going to go further and further in this direction. So yeah, definitely a studio to keep an eye out for. And they announced season 2. They did what used to be kind of more of a classic, but doesn't really happen too often anymore, where at the end of the first season, you announce the second season in the episode. That's friggin' hype. I really want to see what happens. As I said, some of the plot lines of the season, I was kind of like, meh, but I can tell that as the characters and the relationships get more and more established, they can kind of take on more world building, larger character interactions, more lore, and that's the stuff that really intrigues me. So yeah, let's look forward to season 2. So what would I give this? I'm going to give it an 8.5. Yes, that's right. As you can recall from our past discussion, I want to do something to make more discrete my top-end rankings. So I've decided to use a 20-point scale instead of a 10-point scale. It looks a little worse because I like doing little animations of the numbers showing up, and if it's like 0.5, it kind of looks weird. But you know, that's fine. That's how it is. So yeah, Mini Yuri is 0.5 better than Beastars. You can take that one to the bank. But no, I thought this was quite good. I think aspects of it weren't for me. Okay, next we have After School Dice Club. This is a pretty simple premise. You have some girls, they hang out after school and play board games, which often involve dice. That's it. Sure. The production is acceptable, nothing mind-blowing, nothing too high budget or anything like that, but gets the job done. Everything looks cute. A lot of the scenery looks quite beautiful. Probably my favorite shots were those where they went into the board game and they would actually show the characters in the world of the game and the lore and characters of the game kind of coming to life. I wanted more of that. You can tell that that was definitely where a lot of the money went. And I think in the hands of like an extremely high budget studio, this show could just be absolutely crazy as they plunge into these totally imagined worlds. I think it's great too in that it brings out the flavor of the board game even more. That a lot of people kind of see the flavor and trappings of a board game as like just sort of a conduit to better understand the rules. And there's very few people that actually kind of immerse themselves in the imagination of, I am a settler of Catan, I am a merchant of tile floors, whatever. So I think an emphasis on that is pretty cool too. There's a nice variety of plot lines in this. Good character development, that everybody kind of has their own struggles, and their struggles are quite distinct from one another. But generally, it's kind of all around being unable to connect, being unable to feel appreciated and validated by others, and kind of how you can use board games as like a conduit, as a way to make a connection with someone, which I quite like. I think they did a good job adapting the manga, which I've been reading whenever it gets scanlated. They skipped some chapters, they rearranged some chapters. I always approve of anime doing this if there's kind of like a logical reason for it, if it creates like a better arc for the 12 episodes or whatever. I think that's like a great idea. But I did feel a little sad. Some of the chapters I had read, I was looking forward to getting adapted. Specifically, the one that comes to mind. Well, there's a few. The one I like the one where there's like the chess player and the Go player in the park, and they're trying to come up with like a game they can both play to kind of understand one another. I thought that was quite nice. And then there's the absolutely insane chapter about the military history of the guy that owns the board game store and how he was introduced to Settlers of Catan and how it turns some enemies into friends. Just a crazy chapter full of extremely beefy guys playing Settlers. And I was hoping to see that, but I really do approve of like the overall story that they've edited this down to for the anime. Or maybe it was just because they couldn't get the rights to certain board games. I don't really know how this works. I know that in a lot of series, things that were like specific and branded in the manga will be made generic and or like fake branded like Whack-A-Donald's or whatever in the anime. So I thought maybe it would be a situation like that. Like maybe that's why they didn't do the Settlers anime. Like that's a fairly high profile board game. So they couldn't bring it to anime. I don't know. I hope that's not why. I hope they actually had full freedom because they do use real games. They're real board games. I think that's so cool. But this actually teaches you how to play and strategize and stuff for actual board games that you can go out and play with your friends. The discussion of the strategy isn't like Fukumoto depth. It isn't like there's going to be a half-hour scene of deciding where to move your token or whatever. But it can be pretty interesting. It makes you appreciate the board games quite a lot more. But what I think they do really well is the emotional connection between the plots of the episode and the gameplay of the board game. So some of those moments are really beautiful to me. And I think it's just really good writing to be able to have this character-driven story and then to look out to existing board games and try to find ones that can capture this sort of feeling, that can capture the relationships and struggles of these characters. So yeah, I think this is like the what all of these sort of hobby-based shows should be aiming for is to make such a solid connection between the characters and the hobbies that they're partaking in. But my favorite, of course, is big emotional arcs based around creative fulfillment. In any series that features this as a plot point, I'm going to praise it. I'm going to get caught up in it. Just something about the feeling of like a character putting so much effort into a personal labor of love, something that really expresses their own tastes, their own ambitions, something they just want to bring out into the world. and having that be appreciated by their friends, having that show growth and development and fulfillment and validation within themselves. It just makes me so happy for reasons that that are probably pretty obvious. That I spend a lot of my own time doing things like that and seeking those sorts of feelings. So yeah, the story of one of the characters in the show building her own board game and all of the iteration and review and revision and improvement that it goes through is just so touching to me. Okay, so this I would give an 8. I think very, very solid show, a fun watch, but I think it could have done a lot if they had the budget and the time to really wow you on some of the scenes, especially just this feeling of plunging into the world of the board game. But yeah, good times. Okay, Hoshiai no Sora. I have quite a lot to say about this one. So this is the other boys sports no Sora anime. There was two, Ahiru no Sora, which was about basketball, and Hoshiai no Sora, which was about tennis. I kept getting them mixed up before I had watched either, and it seemed though that Ahiru no Sora was like kind of the hit at first, but then Hoshiai no Sora slowly built in popularity throughout the series until by the end it seemed like quite a lot of people were talking about it. So this is intense character drama combined with tennis action. We'll talk about the tennis action first. I really do like in sports anime this idea of like a technique cycle as kind of a plot structure. And I think racket sports really lend themselves well to this. So what I'm talking about here is this kind of mentality of like, whoa, the other team can do that. Like they have this technique. I guess we'll have to use that, like some counter technique we came up to. But oh no, that lost to like their counter play. Like they're still one step ahead. Ooh, but we still have that secret thing that was foreshadowed 2 episodes ago. Will that work here? Oh, let's try it. Like that kind of back and forth escalation. I'm always going to get quite caught up in because if they do a good job in actually showing you and teaching you why one loses to the other, like the logic behind these counterplays, such that you can even start to anticipate what they're going to try next, it's quite gripping, and it's a lot more fun than just like, oh, he's even stronger. I guess I'm going to use all of my strength with this one. Oh, I thought that was all my strength, but now I remembered my friends. Now I can hit it even harder. But it's not very much of that. It's much more psychological, much more about technique and learning and refinement. It's a good way to bring out the personalities and reflect the character arcs too, that characters will play, to their personality. They'll do things that seem characteristic of them. And as they grow and change throughout the series, it reflects in their play too. And often the big breakthrough moment in a game, oh, I should try that, kind of reflects like some big breakthrough they've had in their own life and their own self-conception. Oh, that's cool. That's good. That's what I'm talking about, this marriage of plot elements. So I found myself pretty compelled in a lot of the matches because I really didn't really know who was going to win. And I think this is because tennis is somewhat of a secondary focus in the show, that it's much more about the character dramas, much more about the struggles in their personal lives, that it's not like you can follow, like you can predict the sports aspect based on what you know from other sports series, right? In other sports series, there's often a pretty simple pattern of when they're going to win and when they're going to lose, and you can kind of see it coming from a mile away. Sometimes it'll shock you or subvert you, but it's still kind of playing into your expectations. And it's quite rare that during the match, like while you're watching it, you don't have a pretty good sense of who's going to be the winner. But here, because the tennis is so secondary, because you felt like the results of the tennis match were really just going to facilitate further character discussion and further character development, it's like much harder to see where they're going. So I felt myself kind of caught up, like, oh my gosh, will they be able to win? Will they be able to figure it out? So that was fun. That was a nice change of pace. Uh, they really didn't have the budget though to make it that intense. There were some good shots. I thought the way the characters moved when they were serving and stuff was well done, and there were some nice sequences of rallies and such. But generally, meh. And I gotta tell you, nothing deflates the sense of hype faster than a ball moving slowly. I talked about this with the show Haruka no Receive, where they would like bump the volleyball or whatever, they'd hit it, and it would just slowly tumble through the air because they didn't have the budget to pace it faster. They didn't really have the ability to make it more exciting than that. But it's so excruciating. It just completely takes you out of the action. So yeah, this show suffered a bit because of that. Suffering! On that subject, this show has a lot of suffering. The aforementioned character drama is dramatic indeed. Basically, every character is suffering. They've all got aspects of their life that they're really torn up by, that are occupying them and gripping them to greater or lesser extent. Some of the characters get off pretty easy, relatively speaking, but it's a lot of suffering on this show. Some of them are really brutal too, and this is a genuine trigger warning. The show is not for the faint of heart. It's not for people that really have a bad time watching stuff like this. Genuinely, be careful. There's a lot of child abuse. There's a lot of adult on child violence and other unpleasant things like that. So, this is my warning. And they really bask in this uncomfortable feeling too. Like it's not just kind of a quick, oh, and then this happened, now back to the tennis. But there's like lots of really brutal scenes of just parents being unable to communicate with children, of children sitting there stewing in their own guilt and unhappiness. And it's like I gotta respect them for going this far. Like most shows will have this sort of dramatic element, just like as an element, just as kind of information you're given to make you more invested in the characters. But this show goes further than necessary, and actually allows you to marinate and experience in these awful situations. So this can provide really powerful contrast with the happier times, with camaraderie, when they're all celebrating, when they're cheering each other up, when they're happy together. That's a powerful contrast. That makes those happy times even happier. But that also highlights, this show has quite awkward editing. I don't know if this is just sort of a budgetary thing that they didn't have time to kind of reiterate on this a few more times, but there's a lot of really weird cuts and a lot of bizarre juxtapositions of scenes that I don't think is supposed to be like a deliberately juxtaposing contrast, because it's not so much that you feel like kind of jarred, like, whoa, now this is happening. Some of it is like that. Some of it succeeds like that. A lot of the post-credit scenes are like that. But a lot of other times it's more like just disorienting, where you're like, huh? Like what? We're doing this now? Yeah. And having so many simultaneous dramatic arcs, having every single character going through something and having to kind of cut to them back and forth across episodes, since they're all going on simultaneously, can lead to some really weird pacing. This is very similar to my problem that I had with Oh Maidens in Your Savage season, where there's just so much stuff going on that it was disorienting. But even more so, because there's even more characters and more dramatic arcs happening here. And yeah, it's just that you get this feeling of like, it cuts to something and you're like, oh yeah, this. And that's so disengaging to have to kind of scan your memory to remember what was going on with these characters, instead of being immersed in those characters' emotions and stuff right away. I think just really takes you out of the show. So I don't know. It's just hard to do. Like, it's really hard to do this right. If you want a case study on how to do it well, watch The Wire. The Wire has like a million dramatic plot lines all going on at the same time. It's always cutting back and forth between them. It's very complex, and yet somehow, through some David Simon magic, as soon as you see the characters, you're like right back in with that plot line. There's never any kind of staggering around to figure out again how you're supposed to be feeling. But mostly though, I appreciate how far they went with this dramatic element, because it makes the characters even more engaging. You like them, and now you really want to see them emerge triumphant. You feel actually quite caught up in their struggles and want to see them go to the other side of them. We'll take a quick minute here to talk about this idea of character likability, because I think this is a good opportunity to talk about character writing in anime versus Western drama. So we've been talking about The Wire a few times in this video. I think that's a perfect example of like Western drama and how different a drama like Hoshiai no Sora, even though structurally there's some overlap, you know, it's just kind of characters going through rough things in their life and trying to put stuff together. Um, the way the characters are written are totally different. So most of the kids are likable. They're redeemed quickly. They're generally quite innocent of their faults. Whereas most of the adults are quite irredeemable. They're awful people that are abusive to their children. Most of the adults and most of the children, but generally it's quite black and white character dynamics. There's a set of characters that you're supposed to like, and they won't really do anything to make you like them less as the series goes on. If anything, you'll just get more and more sympathetic towards them. And conversely, some of the characters you're set up to dislike. This isn't like a general rule, but I think it's more so in anime than in Western TV, where you have much more of like, I don't know. I don't know. I hope you can generally agree with me here that this is somewhat of a trend. I don't want to try to overgeneralize or anything. But is this okay? Like, why is this acceptable writing, or is this lazy writing? Is this kind of handing you your opinions instead of challenging you to judge the characters on your own? Moreover, a direct kind of question here, is Maki, the main character of this series, a Mary Sue? As the show got more and more popular, and specifically as it spread to like non-weebs, to people that don't typically watch anime, I started seeing them discuss this show because of some other stuff we'll talk about later. This was a complaint that I saw a few times, that it's like, this show is kind of whatever. It got all hyped up to me, but isn't the main character just like a Mary Sue? Isn't he just like a perfect human being? So I think the key point for anime writing is that the likable personality comes first. That you like Maki, you want to like Maki because he's the protagonist of the show, so he's going to be in almost every scene. So when he does good things, you're happy. You're like, Sasuga Maki, like you're as good as I would hope for you to be. And this is very different than the sort of general understanding of a Mary Sue, which is like the fanfic self-insert type, whose entire personality is just good at stuff, whose only really defining characteristics are that they're super competent and can handle everything and are super in tune with everyone's emotions and everyone loves them. If you have that as the primary thing, and it sort of feels like all of the other personality quirks and whatever struggles they might end up having are just sort of thrown in on top of it, in a kind of a transparent attempt to make them more human, versus it just being kind of a human character that throughout the show you come to like more and more because they keep exceeding your expectations for them. I don't know. It's a subtle difference. Maybe it's not like going to line up how you fit characters into either one of these schema. Like it really does kind of come down to whether or not you like the character, which of course is just a matter of personal taste. So I don't know. I don't know. Well, what do you think? I just, it's kind of interesting to me to have a show like this that is so similar in structure to a lot of like Western drama TV I've watched, but the character writing to be so different. Like you'd never see a character like Maki on The Wire, is basically what I'm saying here. So I think what it comes down to is that the plot is complex enough, and I just want to root for our kids. You know, I just want to have kind of a nice unilateral hope for the show. This easy point of engagement where it's like everyone is sad. I want to see them happy. That's a great way to engage with a show like this, and it doesn't need to be anything more. All right, gay tennis. So, as I mentioned earlier, I have this club where we play rhythm games and watch anime. And it took us quite a few iterations to pick out this show as the one to watch. Um, this was overall a pretty good choice. I enjoyed watching it with my friends. Um, it led to some good discussion and stuff, which we'll talk about, but some of the scenes were quite brutal to sit there and watch with your friends. Kind of uncomfortable, but you know, whatever. That's the risk you take. I had hesitated to suggest it before because I was pretty sure it would be pretty gay. And it's not that my friends are homophobic or anything like that. Of course not. Of course not. It's just that I assumed that like part of the primary appeal of the show was going to be shipping the male characters together, kind of a Fujoshi appeal. I, I had hard read this just from the poster, just from looking at the poster. I thought, okay, this is the sort of show it's going to be. So I was just going to watch it by myself. I hadn't started it when we started watching it at club, but like that was just my plan. I didn't think it would really appeal to other people. So this led to a long ongoing discussion because I mentioned this. I'm like, okay, but you know, I think it's going to be pretty BL-y, right? And then so we I started pointing out things. I'd be like, look, this is super BL. Like, look, the characters are going to get together. This is genuinely going to be a plot line. I was more and more convinced of it. Some of my friends disagreed. We would read into these sorts of scenes. We would keep points. Is it gay tennis or straight tennis? Eventually, we all just started calling it gay tennis. I don't know, something about it just made me laugh because it's such like a sad show. It's so complex and dramatic. They put so much work into writing it that just the idea of calling it gay tennis is so funny to me. And I mean, it's not like this is actually a major part of the plot. These potential relationships between the characters, or any of these sorts of issues. But honestly, I think this kind of aggressive, speculative shipping is fun if you have the right sort of people to discuss it with. If you just kind of see it as another route of engagement into this show, another dimension on which you can talk about it and enjoy it, and one that's a little lighter, more fun and full of levity conversation than talking about like how will he reconcile with his parents? How will he get his dad to stop abusing him? How will he overcome the trauma of being attacked by his mother? No, let's just have fun. Ooh, who do you ship? Do you think these two will get together? Ooh, what was that look for? Ooh, do you think that hug meant something? Yeah, it's so much more fun. So this was how we were going into it. This is the framing of our discussion. But oh my god, what this show actually contains is so far beyond what I could have expected. I never ever could have prepared for the representation that it did have. And I don't want to spoil it, and I don't want to give this too much emphasis. It's just one scene. But I thought it was so well educated, you know, super informed. It was explicit. It wasn't just a bunch of euphemisms. It wasn't really beating around the bush, but talking about these issues with the terminology, with the full ramification of what these words mean. And so empathetic too, you know, like just really understanding, I think, on a level that I really wouldn't have ever expected from anime, what it means to be asking yourself these questions, to be going through this sort of thing. Overall, really excellent. So much better than I ever would have guessed this sort of representation would be in anime. I was so happy. I was just over the moon. You'll totally know the scene I'm talking about when I get to it, but I think that episode in general is just fantastic. Some of the other characters have plot lines too that I thought were really nicely realized. Yeah, so you know, I mean, I it would be even better, of course, if this wonderful moment of representation in education actually led to something, and probably it was supposed to lead to something. But now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the really kind of strange aspect of this series, which is its unfinished business. So this is kind of meta spoilers, if you didn't know. This was actually supposed to be a 2-cour. It was supposed to be 24 episodes. But suddenly, at some point during production, it got cut down to 1-cour. This was something that the director tweeted about. Basically, as soon as the series finished, the director was like, haha, are you guys a little confused? Are you a little disappointed? Well, here's why. Here's what actually happened. And they chose to leave it unfinished. Instead of trying to rush it, instead of trying to consolidate all of the plot points of the entire next season into the remaining episodes, they just continued on as planned and had it just stop in the middle. This is really tragic. It really sucks that we won't get to find out what was going to happen. We won't get to see the rest of these character arcs and see how these plot lines are going to be resolved. And a lot of characters are left at their absolute lowest points, which makes sense. You know, it's halfway through the series. They hit an unprecedented crisis to kind of serve as a hook into the next season. And then in the next season, they presumably recover and find happiness and overcome these issues. But we don't get to see that. It ends on a really crazy cliffhanger, too. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but it's like an unprecedented crisis is emerging. Something really bad might happen, and then it just ends. It's pretty unique to have a show like this. I can't think of anything else that ends this abruptly after being so fully realized. Like, sure, there's a lot of anime and manga series that have really weird endings, but normally it's like a sense of either like, I'm thinking of Gal cleaning here, if you know about that infamous abomination disaster where the mangaka begins to resent the reader base and is like trying to get canceled. That can lead to some crazy abrupt endings. Or a situation where, you know, they are just getting canceled, but the creator is quite sympathetic and does their best to kind of give some resolution to the readers, some sense of closure. But this just ends. It just ends. It's so crazy. But it kind of seems somehow more real, you know, because we have this sense that, you know, things will just keep going. The suffering will continue. That's just life. It's not so convenient that everything is taken care of by the time we say goodbye to these characters. They just have to keep going. And they didn't, and yeah, normally most canceled things, before they're outright done, will have an opportunity to kind of give you, and their journeys continue, a little send-off to the characters, some sense of resolution, some kind of guidance about how you can think of the series going forward. But again, no, it just ends. Like, really though, I just want the second season. I just want to see what happens. I want to see the characters redeemed. I want to see everyone happy. But I will say that it was quite a unique experience to just be watching the show, to have this dreadful feeling of like they don't have time. Like there's no time to deal with all these plot lines. What can possibly happen? And this like weird, yeah, this weird dreadful anticipation, and then it just ends. But you were right. They couldn't deal with all of it. It's just over. So yeah, there's a campaign to get a season 2 going. I support that. I support you in supporting that. I hope we can make some sort of difference. We can see the rest of the show at some point. I'm not super optimistic though. These sorts of business type decisions are leagues away from online fan support. Like it has to be such a complex chain of events and effects and causality in order to get something like this greenlit. But, you know, we'll do our best. We'll do our best to see these kids happy. So, overall, I would give this an 8.5. Solid enough. I think it drags at certain points, and it certainly suffers in many ways because it's so unresolved. But quite a unique show and quite a likable cast and some really wonderful exploration of spaces that anime normally does not touch with a 10-foot pole. So cool. Yeah, very cool. Okay. Also, if you're curious, I've updated the scores I gave everything else to have where I would put them with on the 20-point scale. So a few of them changed. Yeah, with this we've now done a full year of anime reviews. Wow, it's kind of exciting. From this list, you can probably quite easily figure out, if not the specific ordering, then the general contents of my top 10 anime of 2019. That video will be coming out soon. So look forward to that, even if it's not going to be like a shocker. And then of course we have the 2010s lists coming to top anime of the decade and what have you. So yeah, that's all for that. Bye bye for now.